Hey there. Make sure to subscribe and smash that like button so you never miss a spine-tingling moment. Now, get comfy, turn off the lights, and now, let's begin. It was just past midnight when I felt myself sinking into that quiet, insistent edge of sleep, the kind that edges you in slowly, like a tide creeping toward the shore. The wind howled a low, mournful tune outside, rattling the loose pane in my bedroom window. It was a sound I'd known since childhood, the soundtrack to countless winter nights spent buried under a mountain of quilts. I was in that hazy space between wakefulness and dreams, my thoughts drifting like snowflakes on the frigid air. Then, a sound cut through the familiar noises, sharp and utterly out of place. It was a laugh. Not a chuckle or a giggle, but the distinct, unabashed laughter of a very young child, maybe a baby. It lasted only a second, maybe two, yet it was so clear and proximate that it seemed to be right there in the room with me. My eyes snapped open, scanning the moon-drenched shadows of my bedroom. There was nothing but the familiar shapes of my desk, my wardrobe, and the chair piled high with clothes. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had to be my imagination, I reasoned, a phantom sound birthed from a half-formed dream. We were miles from our nearest neighbors, and my younger brother, Ben, was a teenager, long past the age of babyish laughter. I held my breath, listening intently, straining to hear it again. The only sounds were the groaning house and the lonely cry of the wind. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of a tired mind. I pulled the covers up to my chin, closed my eyes, and forced my racing thoughts to slow, eventually succumbing to an uneasy sleep. The next morning, the world was blanketed in a fresh layer of snow, bright and silent under a pale winter sun. The strange event of the night before felt distant, almost foolish in the light of day. I went downstairs to the kitchen, where the smell of coffee and frying bacon hung in the air. My mother was at the stove, and my father was reading the paper at the table. My younger sister, Clara, who was 14, sat across from him, listlessly pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. She looked pale and tired. "You look like you saw a ghost," I said, pouring myself a glass of orange juice. I meant it as a joke, a simple morning pleasantry. Clara looked up, her eyes wide and dark-ringed. She didn't smile. "I didn't sleep well," she said, her voice quiet. "Something woke me up." My father lowered his newspaper. "The wind was pretty rough last night, probably a branch hitting the side of the house." Clara shook her head slowly, her gaze fixed on something beyond the kitchen window. "No, it wasn't that. It was a noise. A really strange one. A cold knot formed in my stomach." I tried to keep my voice casual, feigning simple curiosity. "Strange how?" She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. "It's going to sound crazy," she finally said, looking from our mother to our father, then to me. I heard a baby, crying. The cheerful warmth of the kitchen seemed to evaporate. The air grew still and heavy. My own experience, which I had so successfully dismissed as a dream, came rushing back with chilling clarity. The sound I had heard was not crying, but its opposite. Yet, the source was undeniably the same. My father exchanged a look with my mother, a quick, almost imperceptible glance that I couldn't decipher. "A baby?" my mother asked, her voice gentle but strained. "Honey, you were probably just dreaming. There's no baby for miles." "I wasn't dreaming," Clara insisted, her voice rising with frustration. "I was wide awake. It was loud, and then it just stopped." She looked directly at me then, her eyes pleading for belief. I could only stare back, the unspoken confirmation lodged in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I had heard, afraid that speaking it aloud would somehow make it more real, more permanent. The coincidence was too great, too specific, to be ignored. Our old house, which had always felt like a safe and familiar shell, suddenly felt vast, unknown, and watchful. The memory of that laughter, once just a strange anomaly, now felt like the first note in a terrifying, unfolding secret. When my sister Emily and her daughter, Lucy, moved into the townhouse on Brookridge Lane, I remember thinking how quiet the place felt. Rows of identical brick units, each with tidy lawns and pale curtains that never quite moved. It was the sort of neighborhood where the silence seemed intentional, like everyone had agreed not to make too much noise. They'd only been there a few weeks when Emily called me late one night. Her voice was low, shaky. She said Lucy had woken up screaming about the man in her room. I asked if she'd checked the windows, the locks. She said yes, everything was sealed tight. She'd turned over the closet, under the bed, even the crawl space. Nothing. I told her it was probably just a nightmare. Lucy was 6, at that age where shadows have their own logic. Emily agreed, but I could tell from the way she said goodnight that she didn't believe it. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, Lucy ran into Emily's room, sobbing, saying the man had been standing by her dresser, yelling at her. Emily searched the apartment again, doors locked, windows latched. The only sound was the refrigerator hum and Lucy's uneven breathing. She started letting Lucy sleep in her bed after that. I visited the next weekend. The place looked normal, warm even. Toys in the corner, a faint smell of coffee. But Lucy wouldn't go near her room. When I asked her why, she just said, "He doesn't like me in there," and turned her face toward the wall. Emily looked at me over her head, and I didn't know what to say. That afternoon, we went to the playground in the middle of the complex. A woman, sitting on the bench next to us, struck up a conversation. Small talk about schools, rent, the usual things. When she heard which unit Emily was in, her expression flickered, just for a second. "That's the one where that guy died," she said quietly. "A few years back. Overdose, I think. His little boy used to play around here all the time." Emily didn't respond right away. She just stared across the playground where Lucy was digging in the sand, her pink shoes half buried. On the drive home, she asked me if I'd heard anything about it before. I hadn't. That night, after Lucy was asleep on the couch, Emily started searching online. It didn't take long. There was a name, a brief obituary, a photo. The man looked ordinary, dark hair, tired eyes, a faint smile that didn't quite reach. Nothing remarkable. And yet, the sight of his face made something tighten in my chest. Emily sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. "This is the same unit," she said quietly. "Same layout. His kid's room would have been Lucy's." I didn't answer. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound again, steady and low, like a reminder of something still moving beneath the surface. We debated whether to show Lucy. I didn't think it was a good idea. She was already terrified, but Emily said she needed to know if this was the same man she'd seen. "If it's not him, then we can stop worrying," she said. But her voice lacked conviction. She called Lucy into the computer room. The moment Lucy stepped inside, her eyes landed on the monitor. She froze, then let out a sound I'd never heard from her before, part scream, part sob. She turned and ran, her small feet pounding down the hall, the echo hanging in the air long after she was gone. Emily shut the browser without saying a word. We sat in silence for a long time, the screen still faintly glowing even after it went dark. Finally, she whispered, "That's him. It has to be." A few days later, they packed up and left. I helped load the boxes into the car. The apartment looked ordinary again, empty rooms, bare walls, sunlight spilling across the carpet. It was just past 2 in the morning on Christmas Day when I woke with a dry throat and the dull weight of sleep still clinging to my limbs. The house was dark, the kind of silence that presses against the eardrums when snow falls softly outside, muffled, complete. Our suburban home in Havenwood had settled into its usual winter hush, the heating system long since quieted, the family asleep behind closed doors. I was 19, old enough to move out, but not yet ready. This would be my last Christmas here, I told myself, the last time I'd wake to artificial pine scent and wrapped gifts stacked beneath a dying tree. I shuffled down the hallway in socked feet, the floorboards cold beneath me, my breath forming faint clouds in the chilled air. The bathroom was at the end of the hall, a small tiled room with a frosted window too high to see through. I flicked on the light, bright, fluorescent, and stepped inside. As I closed the door, I heard it. A sound from the vent in the floor. At first I thought it was the house breathing, pipes groaning, the furnace stuttering to life. But then it came again. A sigh, soft, guttural, and then a sob. Not loud, not frantic. Just the quiet broken weeping of a woman trying not to be heard. Froze. The vent was small, set into the corner near the toilet, covered in dull metal grating. I knew where they all led. The entire house was built over a crawl space that emptied into the laundry room in the basement. My father had shown me the ducts once, tracing their paths with a flashlight like veins beneath the floor. I crouched down, my pulse steady but wary, and leaned closer. The sound was unmistakable now. Muffled sobs, rhythmic as if someone were curled up just beneath the grate, weeping into their hands. The air rising through the vent was faintly warm, carrying nothing else, no dust, no smell, just that voice. I listened for nearly a minute, waiting for it to stop, for some logical explanation. A neighbor, a recording. But there was only the house, still and watchful around me. I flushed the toilet, half to break the silence, half to test it. The vent exhaled with the change in air pressure, and the sobbing paused. Then it resumed. I left the bathroom without washing my hands. My skin was cold. I went straight to my parents' room and knocked softly. My mother answered, bleary-eyed, wrapped in a quilt. "Everything okay?" she asked. I told her about the vent, about the crying. "Was it you?" I asked. "Were you down in the laundry room?" She frowned, then shook her head. "No, I've been asleep since 10. Why would I be down there at this hour?" I believed her. Her confusion was real, her voice untouched by grief. And then she added quietly, "No one's been in the laundry room for days." I didn't go back to bed. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the door that led downstairs. The house remained silent after that. No more sobs. No more movement from below. But over the next few weeks I noticed things. A towel left on the washing machine, not ours. A single pearl earring on the cold concrete floor, tarnished and old. And once, just once, the faint scent of lilac. My mother doesn't wear perfume. I never heard the crying again. But sometimes when the house is quiet and the vents hum with warm air, I catch myself listening, not for sound, but for the absence of it. The space where grief hides. And I wonder who or what is still down there, unseen, still weeping into the dark. The decision to move back to the old family home in coastal Seabrook was born of necessity, not nostalgia. After my grandparents passed, the house, a salt-worn colonial that had been in our family since the late 50s, sat empty. For me and my 7-year-old son, Leo, it was a refuge after a period of upheaval, a place to anchor ourselves. I remembered it as a house of warmth, smelling of baking bread and my grandmother's lavender soap. But as we pulled into the gravel drive, it seemed more like a relic, its windows watching us like tired, clouded eyes. Our first day was a flurry of activity, the organized chaos of unpacking. Leo, thrilled by the sheer size of the place compared to our small apartment, made it his mission to explore every nook and cranny. His delighted shouts echoed through the high-ceilinged rooms as he discovered the built-in bookshelves in the study and the dumbwaiter hidden behind a paneled door in the kitchen. For a few hours, the house felt like a grand adventure, its history a welcoming embrace rather than a heavy shroud. As dusk began to bleed through the tall, wavy glass of the windows, the character of the house shifted. The cheerful echoes of my son's play were replaced by a profound quiet, and the long shadows that stretched across the floorboards seemed to reclaim the space. The old home began to breathe around us, sighing with the creak of settling timber and the low whistle of wind sneaking through the window frames. It was a language I had forgotten, and its sudden return felt vaguely unsettling. After I finally wrangled a weary Leo into bed in what used to be my mother's childhood room, he was uncharacteristically restless. He commented on the loud quiet, the strange groans and pops emanating from the walls. I soothed him with dismissive explanations. It's just an old house settling. The pipes are just old. All the while, a small, irrational prickle of awareness crawled up my own spine. I told myself it was just the exhaustion of the move, the emotional weight of being back in this place without its former keepers. Later, as I moved through the downstairs, tidying the last of the day's mess, a sudden, intense chill enveloped me in the main hallway. It was a pocket of cold, so distinct it felt as if I had walked into a refrigerated room. My breath misted for a second, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I stopped, turning to check for an open window or a draft from the front door, but found nothing. The air was perfectly still, and just as quickly as the cold had arrived, it vanished, leaving the ambient warmth of the house in its place. Shaking it off, I decided it was time for bed. I flicked off the living room lamp, plunging the ground floor into a deep gloom, broken only by a small nightlight near the base of the main staircase. The stairs, carved from a dark, heavy oak, loomed in the entryway. As my foot touched the first step, I felt a strange reluctance, a sense of being watched from the deep shadows of the landing above. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a silent, waiting energy. I was halfway up the creaking steps when I saw him. Leo was standing at the bottom, a small, still silhouette against the faint glow behind him. He hadn't made a sound. He was simply there, his head tilted up as he watched my ascent. I smiled, about to ask him what he was doing out of bed, but the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't looking at me, but just past me, over my shoulder. His voice, when he spoke, was unnervingly clear and calm in the vast silence of the house. "Mom," he said, his eyes fixed on the empty space behind me. "Who is that man standing behind you?" For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant moan of a foghorn out on the water, all of it ceased to exist. There was only my son's question hanging in the air. A jolt of pure, primal fear shot through me, cold and sharp. I whipped around, my hand grasping the smooth, worn banister for support, my heart hammering against my ribs. The staircase behind me was empty. There was nothing but the floral wallpaper and the deep, impenetrable shadows of the upper hall. "What are you talking about, sweetie?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper as I hurried back down to him. I knelt, trying to keep my hands from shaking as I held his shoulders. "There's no one there. You were just dreaming." He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at that spot on the stairs for a few seconds more, his expression placid and unreadable. Then his gaze shifted back to my face, and he said, "Never mind." His quiet dismissal was more terrifying than any scream could have been. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just a trick of the light. I was 16, sprawled across my bed in my attic bedroom, fiddling with the belt I'd left on my dresser. The polished silver buckle caught the late afternoon sun, and as I turned it absent-mindedly, something made me pause. Etched into the metal, faint but unmistakable, was a perfect Star of David. I frowned, running my thumb over it. The belt was old, a hand-me-down from my grandfather, but I'd worn it dozens of times and never seen this before. The lines were too precise to be a scratch, too deliberate. I dismissed it as some odd manufacturing quirk, but the unease lingered. A week later, I saw it again. I was wiping down my mirror, a full-length antique with a tarnished frame, when my reflection rippled under a sudden distortion. I froze. There, in the center of the glass, the same six-pointed star had materialized, as if drawn by an invisible hand. My breath hitched. I reached out, expecting the mark to smear under my fingers, but it remained stubborn and crisp. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? "Hey, Mom, weird symbols keep appearing in my room?" It sounded ridiculous. Besides, after a few days, the mark on the mirror faded, and I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Life went on. Then, 3 months later, my sisters called me downstairs. They were redecorating their shared bedroom, a space at the far end of the house, separated from mine by a long hallway and a flight of stairs. As they peeled away an old band poster that had hung by their door for over a year, my stomach dropped. There, on the back of the poster, pressed against the wall in perfect undisturbed dust, was the star. The air left my lungs. My youngest sister, oblivious, wrinkled her nose. "Did you draw this?" she asked, poking at the lines. I couldn't answer. The poster had been untouched since they'd put it up. No one had moved it. No one had drawn on it. And yet there it was, the same symbol. In a room I never entered, on an object I never touched. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked softly, the way old houses do, but every sound felt deliberate, like footsteps testing the floorboards. I thought about the belt, the mirror, the poster. 3 separate instances, 3 separate places, all connected by something I couldn't explain. I wondered if it was a warning, or worse, a claim. The marks never appeared again. But sometimes, when the light hits my bedroom window just right, I catch myself searching the glass, waiting for the lines to form. I was 16 when it happened, living in a quiet colonial house on the outskirts of Elm Ridge, where the trees pressed too close to the windows and the wind carried voices that weren't there. My room was on the 2nd floor, the farthest from the stairs, tucked under the slant of the roof. It always felt just a little too still in there. That night I'd gone to bed early. Rain tapped the glass in slow rhythms, and the house had long since gone dark. I lay beneath the covers, half awake, drifting between thoughts, when I heard it. Not a creak, not the house settling. Breathing, deep, labored, close. It came from the foot of the bed, just beyond where my feet rested, out of sight in the black. A slow, wet inhale, then a shuddering exhale, as if something heavy were struggling to pull air through a throat full of stones. It wasn't mine. It wasn't human, not in the way breathing should be. It was waiting. I froze. My heart thudded once, then again, each beat louder than the last. I strained to see through the dark, but the shadows were absolute. The breathing continued, steady, rhythmic, impossibly present. I could feel it, the faint stir of air against my ankles, the weight of something watching from the edge of my vision. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body moved on its own, kicking off the blanket, bolting upright and out of bed in one frantic motion. I didn't look back. I slammed my door open and ran down the hall to my sister's room. Maya was already in her pajamas, reading under the covers. "What?" she asked, startled. "You look like you've seen a ghost. There's something in my room." I whispered. "At the foot of the bed. I can hear it breathing." She hesitated, then sighed and followed me back. We stood in the doorway, the hall light casting a dull gold rectangle across the floor. The room was silent, empty, cold. Maya stepped inside, looked around, listened, then sat at the edge of the bed, arms crossed. "I don't hear anything," she said. "You sure you didn't dream it?" I shook my head. It was real. It was right there. She stayed for nearly 20 minutes, talking softly, trying to calm me. Eventually, she patted my shoulder and left, telling me to lock my door. I didn't move. I sat on the floor by the door, knees drawn to my chest, eyes locked on the foot of the bed. The house quieted. The rain slowed. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, inhale. A thick, guttural drag of air, louder than before, closer. Exhale, long, ragged shuddering. It wasn't just sound. It carried pressure, like fog pushed through clenched teeth. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The darkness at the end of the bed didn't shift, but I knew, without seeing, that something was there, something that had waited for her to leave. I did not go back to bed that night. To this day, I don't. 10 years later, and I still sleep with the lights on. I spent my childhood in a peeling, 2-story house just outside of New Iberia, Louisiana. Its porch perpetually humid and shaded by ancient Spanish moss. The foundation of the house rested almost against the muddy banks of the Bayou Teche, where the water moved slow and dark, mirroring the deep silence of the surrounding cypress trees. My mother, 83 years old now, still lives in that house, enduring the presence that has never truly left. We were never alone there. For years, the same apparition, a translucent young man dressed in clothes that looked out of time, would walk slowly across the lawn and drift past the long, narrow front windows. He was quiet, yet his arrival signaled the start of the night's disturbances. The mechanical acts were constant, lamps turning themselves on at 3 in the morning, radios sputtering to life with static and snatches of outdated music, only to click off again seconds later. These things became background noise, the rhythmic pulse of our unusual existence on the bayou. The most insistent part of the haunting, however, belonged solely to the upstairs hall. Every night, the steps would begin a slow, dragging rhythm that approached my bedroom door, hesitated briefly, and then paced back down the long corridor toward the back of the house. My parents had long ago developed a strategy of denial. They never mentioned the young man outside, nor did they acknowledge the loud click of the bedside lamp going out in the middle of a sentence. They pretended not to hear the steps that stalked our sleep, but the strain was visible in my father's constant grimace, and the way my mother always held a silver crucifix tight in her pocket. When I was 8 years old, the steps were perhaps the only sound I truly feared. I would lie stiff under my covers, counting the beats, memorizing the pause at my threshold. It was a torture of proximity, the constant awareness that something was waiting, just beyond the thin barrier of pine wood. One suffocating August night, the humidity pressing down like a weight, the routine was worse than usual. The pacing was unrelenting, the retreat shorter, the approach more immediate. Hour after hour, the thump drag. Pause. Thump drag. Eroded my young patience. A wave of sheer, irrational frustration washed over me. I sat bolt upright in bed, shaking with a sudden, furious anger at the violation of my peace. I wasn't thinking about safety, only about making the noise stop. I yelled into the darkness of my room. The steps stopped, instantly. They had been almost upon my door, and then there was a void of silence, thick and absolute, far more terrifying than the noise had ever been. I stared at the crack beneath the door, heart pounding against my ribs. After a moment that stretched into eternity, the door handle began to turn slowly, barely perceptible, before the door opened just a fraction of an inch, revealing only the absolute blackness of the hallway. I felt the sudden, shocking loss of pressure beneath my head. A furious, invisible force seized the pillow, yanking it hard enough to peel the fabric roughly across my cheek. It flew across the room and slammed against the far wall near the window. Screams erupted from me, high, frantic, unstoppable. My parents burst into the room moments later, turning on the light to find me sobbing hysterically, pointing a trembling finger at the pillow lying discarded on the floor across the room. My parents comforted me until dawn, but not much sleep was had that night. We knew, without speaking a word, that the ghost that paced our hall in New Iberia had heard my desperate command, and for the first time it had decided to answer.